Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back to GI Live London. Oh, I'm a bit too close to those, sorry. I'm James Batchelor. I'm editor-in-chief of GamesIndustry.biz, and I'm here to host the Games Investment Panel, the very originally titled session that almost feels obligatory at this point. But the great thing about this industry is there is constantly opportunities to find new funding for new projects, to find new games that could become new hits, and it's about finding the finance and the support that brings those to market. I'm not going to be talking about that. I'm going to be asking these lovely people to talk about that because they know a lot more than I do. My panel today is Agostino Simonetta, who is Chief Strategy and Investment Officer at Thunderful. Ago, give a wave. There we go. Cassia Curran, founder of Curran Games Agency. Even better wave. And Parin Shah, Principal Investor from Lego Ventures. Okay, this is where I cheat and do the bit where I get them to tell you all more about themselves. Let's have a little bit more on your background, your current role in terms of investment and helping developers find the funding that they need. Let's start with you, Ago.
Thanks, James, and hi, everyone. I'm Ago. I'm the Chief Strategy Investment Officer at Thunderful. It's a new role. I joined 3 months ago, so I'm a new employee in the company coming from Xbox before. What we do as a company, in the gaming segment, we are a developer, so we have over 240 people in our development studios. We are a publisher, so we are publishing a lot of games at the moment, but we're also out looking for company to invest in, and also company to acquire.
So I'm Cassia Curran. I run a agency, Curran Games Agency, where I help multiple indie game studios with strategy, business development. And what that means in practice is that I spend a lot of time helping the studios find the best publishing or investment partnerships for them. I also advise various project finance funds on operational strategies and so on.
Great, and I'm Parin. Great to be here. I invest with Lego Ventures, so you probably heard of Lego. You may have grown up with Lego. We are the venture capital arm of the Lego brand. We're active in gaming, or what we like to call digital play, and we're searching for experiences that are really fun, active, social, meaningful initiatives, and build the skills that we think are really important, like creativity, and critical thinking, and other skills like that. We're active at Series A and Series B+, and know a bunch of other folks that operate at early stage as well.
Okay. We'll dive in with a fairly broad question. What is the current state of investment for video games in the UK at the moment? Like, what's the state of play if people are looking for finance? So what's the landscape looking like at the moment? Anyone?
So it's kind of interesting when you're just saying specifically for one region, because I think one of the major trends in the last, over the pandemic, would be like the internationalization. Of funds. It's the fact that so much work is taking place remotely means that everyone's on the same level everyone's been on the same level playing field where they've not been able to access geographically very easily companies to do due diligence, for example. So you've had to do everything online. From an investor perspective, they can sort of generally target any country. So you have the studios now which are based in places like Guatemala or Indonesia that are actually getting these publishing deals or investment deals from overseas investors. For UK specifically, I'd say that it's a relatively healthy place for investors and publishers to operate, or investors. Specifically in the UK, you have the SEIS, EIS schemes, which is very attractive to investors. You have UK tax video game tax relief, and then there's other governments across the world, which some of them are very helpful. So the German government and the Canadian government will have really fantastic funds, production funds matching. But then there's other countries which have no government help at all. There's industries that have a much harder time finding investment. But for the UK specifically, it's a pretty good place to be in indie studio, for example.
Yeah, I would add, in terms of kind of venture and the venture markets, the entire way through from kind of like pre-seed through to late stages. It's a very hot market right now, and I think that is great if you're a company that's looking to raise initial capital with a very strong team, or a company which is demonstrating very interesting metrics kind of through that journey. I think for leading companies, raising right now is very, very attractive. You have a lot of actually generalist VCs looking at gaming and actually treating gaming as one of the kind of priority areas, which I don't think was the case even a few years ago, and that's because of success cases like Roblox, for example, and other kind of big game launches, 1047 Games as well, for example, that in a few months has raised more than $1 billion valuation and making a really, really cool game. So I think that's all really, really good. I think for us, we're active in Western Europe and the US. I think those still tend to be priority markets, and we're looking for, I guess, centers of excellence and centers where like talent is located, and the UK is definitely one of those. So it's a great time to be in gaming, and a great time for creativity in general. So I think that's all really positive.
You made actually a great comment about we have long Lego Venture today, right? James, you and I have been on panels before, maybe 3-4 years ago, and we would never have thought that VC would have been interested beyond mobile business, right? The spectrum of investment opportunities today is unrecognizable from a few years ago. Private equity coming in and the venture market being here, the players being in this space. We used to talk about like private, like families funding your project, the bank funding your project, funding a publisher, the platform giving you money. So what's really changed, and for the UK and globally, is just the spectrum of people now are interested in putting money into this market. Until 3-4 years ago, it would have been unthinkable beyond the mobile space to actually have VC coming in and talking to companies. Now it's very different. I mean, the UK is one of the premium, historically, countries in Europe with a tradition of video game development of big studios, so, pretty healthy. We ourselves bought CodeSync a year ago, so, we did a pretty big acquisition in the UK. The great thing is, that's not changing. UK still has a lot of talent, and there is a lot of players here on the ground. So that's always a positive to have the people based here, to have a conversation, especially now that we're going back to real life meetings.
You say about the return to real life and like the growing interest in games over the last 3-4 years. I think that's obviously been accelerated by the pandemic and the fact that games have proven to be such a connective, positive force for people over the last few years. While we've all been stuck at home. Looking specifically at investment then, like how has the pandemic kind of affected the opportunities? I know obviously like a lot of people have been doing meetings remotely, and a lot of a lot of connections have still been made while all of this has been going on, but like has it changed what people are looking for, which people are interested in games, that sort of stuff?
Well, I definitely think a lot of investors have twigged that games is very much like an excellent counter-cyclical play, is an excellent defensive play when the general world economy is going down. Typically, games still tend to do well, like when lots of people are unemployed and stuck at home. They often tend to buy video games and to entertain themselves. It's a relatively cheap form of entertainment. And so you're seeing now, like one of the reasons for this kind of flood of investment into video games is due to that. It's kind of like a hedging part of a certain investment fund strategy. So from that perspective, that's been a major impact on the investment landscape. I think that from like a sort of process perspective, I think it's definitely been very, but everyone's, as I mentioned earlier, everyone's in the same boat where they're having to remotely make these connections. But it's still been totally possible. Like this year, the first half of this year saw $60 billion worth of M&A and investments, which was twice the amount of M&A investments done last year. So it's just been going up and up.
I also think the benefit of the pandemic has almost been that idea of like games as the new social. It's not a particularly insightful thought, but it's something which a lot of people are thinking about. And even when you get people like Mark Zuckerberg saying, we want to build the M word. it means that more people pay attention to the types of interactive media that can actually enable something that feels closer to real life connection. And then I think in terms of kind of investment process, I guess initially it probably felt a bit weird because I know like in VC circles it's sometimes said that before closing a deal, you want to look your partner in the eye, your business partner, you're going on a journey with this company, you want to look the founder in the eye and say, understand who they are. But I think actually a lot of people realise that Zoom, although it can be a bit soul-destroying, is incredibly efficient. So you can get through quite a lot, you can do a lot of DD, a lot of reference calls in a relatively short space of time. So I think that might also be part of the reason why the pace of deployment has gone up. And again, we've been through that whole journey of every person and their grandma has had to learn how to use some form of interactive medium to communicate, which is an incredible learning journey that otherwise a lot of people may not have even gone on. So I think that all plays into that thinking around why is games society relevant to the mainstream, and I think that's part of what's captured a lot of people's attention.
So a couple of points, again, talking about looking people in the eyes. I think that is being harder to the pandemic to get to closing a deal, being a publishing deal or an acquisition deal or an investment it takes longer, a lot of calls to get that level of confidence. If it's a new partner that you don't know. I've been involved in partnerships and deals where it was a new partner, we didn't know each other from before. So it takes a bit longer to actually get to the point where you can actually look through the contract and say, we trust each other, don't worry about that. So the building that level of confidence has been harder work. And then the other one is the lack of those epiphany moments. You stumble across someone, you strike a conversation, we have not seen each other in a while, you should talk to this person. On Zoom, I tried really proactively to set up calls with a lot of people I wanted to keep in touch, but it's not the same. While we are here today, we're going to have a chat with people that we would not have set up a call with, and suddenly, there is an opportunity there. I didn't know that. So I missed that epiphany moments, for sure, and I think it's just been harder work to build that level of trust and confidence, especially between your partners. On the other side, you can be negotiating a deal with someone in Japan in the morning and negotiating with South America in the evening and do presentation with Eastern Europe in the afternoon. So that is a great learning. We're gonna, I think all of us take away with us.
Having said, I think if you're a studio from a commercialized background, so developers who don't fit the standard pattern or the image of a video game developer, it's been a bit easier for them actually in the last year and a half, because they, for example, going to these kind of conferences isn't really possible for developers from say Guatemala that easily. It's just been, it means that they've had the same playing field as many others.
Yeah, and I guess you had the Richard from Mexico before, and obviously that's where I come from. And you have seen platform hosting those online events, targeting. Sometimes, it's just an online event, anybody can attend, but actually targeting certain regions, Africa or South America, or just to break those barriers. So that's actually the other side of that coin. For the people that maybe in the past had the privilege of being able to do it, but also part of the circle, or the circus, call it what you like, but actually has opened up a lot of opportunity. We, Thunderful, we have titles that we signed from developers in Brazil that we probably would never have met at an event. So it really opens up that channel.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper into that then. How important is travel in terms of securing investment? Because 3-4 years ago, I think the assumption was you needed to get to somewhere like a GDC, a Gamescom, an E3, some sort of large trade show in order to get in front of the investors and just make your case, let alone secure the investment. And as you say, over the last 2 years, we've really learned kind of lots of different kind of remote solutions. There's been pros and cons to it. I kind of hear two schools of thought, when I'm talking to people, some people are like, this is brilliant, I never have to travel again. And some people are like, well, I really miss actually getting to know people, getting that natural rapport when you're in the room with someone. That's irreplaceable. That's not something you can do between a screen. So, as you say, Cassia, it's leveled the playing field over the last couple of years because no one can travel, therefore no one is at an advantage. But as we're kind of gearing towards being able to travel again, is that balance going to shift again? Is that...
I think it's too early to say, but in a way the cool thing is that everyone has had to do it in a certain way, online completely for the last year and a half, and so therefore it's very, it means that like all the usefulness, like the efficiency, we can take over into this new post-pandemic world. And that kind of level playing field, like the fact that Thunderful is doing deals with Brazilian studios, that opens up doors to more Brazilian studios going forward, and other regions which are still developing. So, but it's very much individuals. Some people, like myself, really miss conferences and really miss being in the room with people and getting to know people and having that kind of like person-to-person interaction. But other people find that the last year and a half has been fantastic for them. So it's gonna be hard to say how it shakes out.
And the fact they had such a positive impact on making deals with developers who will not have met, that we have seen that the war doesn't end because we can't travel and meet people. I think we're gonna, I know that myself, I used to be on a plane every other week or every week. I will never go back to that because I learned that, you know, well, it's beneficial, so still there's gonna be things that will be done in person and you can see or some of those. But actually the success we have been having, connecting with people that can't travel, can't be at the event. The natural reaction for a lot of us in the past was like, oh, we want to meet. Oh, where are you going to be? When are you going to be? Like, I remember it was a PlayStation developer like, oh, we're going to come to Germany to meet you. Now, today that's not going to happen. We are all used to do business in a video call, and the benefit of it really will change the way we look at how we do business going forward. Cost as well. A lot of companies, you know, beyond, you know, offices, you know, we focus a lot on offices. There are a lot of companies that are looking at their travel and expense costs. And so, look, we have been closing deals, we've been building partnerships, we've been very successful. Do we really need to go back to the old days? Does it really make sense?
Yeah. And it's like time as well, like time traveling to these places, it's really expensive from that perspective. So yeah, there's a lot of efficiencies that can be brought over, but then I think it's less fun.
I think the kind of related question is all around like top of funnel, especially in venture. So, and maybe a related point is diversity and making sure that, you know, everyone who has a concept that's actually really interesting and wants to make the next big studio has a chance of getting the attention they deserve on that project. And if more of the attention is focused on, you know, some of those cold inbounds or you know, stuff that comes in through non-traditional channels, I think it's actually really good. Because it opens your eyes to the different types of play patterns and game concepts that still have broad appeal that could arguably succeed. It's just that person is not in the traditional place at whatever time.
And you can, and now opportunities are being judged upon the metrics and the actual game itself rather than necessarily like the interpersonal relationship of a team. It's not necessarily like you have far less of the kind of making deals between friends dynamic this last year and a half, which I think is overall positive.
And actually, I like that your point on making deals with friends, right? We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, you know, when you talk about work environment and, you know, the intake of people in the industry. But actually the same concept should be applied to deals. You know, people that have been on, you know, on this circus for a while, we all know each other. We all spend time together, have dinner together, we have a similar circle of friends. And again, when you talk about marginalized developer, people that can't travel, there are so many ideas that we are missing out because you're fishing in the same pond all the time, in that circle of trust or circle of network that ultimately, as big as it can be, is limited by the ability to meet in person. So I think we are now able and open, we're being forced in a way to open up and look outside. I think Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, made a very interesting point at the beginning of the pandemic when he said that for Microsoft there was an acceleration of, in very few months, of about 2-3 years in terms of moving forward in a more digital world. I think it's the same is happening in business development, on deal making for our industry. We are being forced to rethink it, the approach, the market, the people we talk to, and really have a positive long-term effect.
Cool, so with the market a lot more open, like, you know, there's that level playing field, like more companies from around the world can reach investors and have these conversations. With so much to choose from, not limited by who you're able to travel to meet or who's able to travel to meet you. What should developers be doing to attract investors? Like, what are investors, like investors, VCs, publishers, what are they looking for at the moment that developers can kind of present to them?
That's well, I think just like an overall understanding of the market right now is that there's so many publishers and there's so many different types of investors, and there's like each publisher or each investor has their own kind of strategy or approach, or their own kind of like games or teams or opportunities that they're looking for. So it's really a case of finding the right match, but also being aware as well of the amount of competition that you have. So the publishers these days, for example, they'll receive something like 1,000 to 2,000 pictures per year. You have maybe almost like 300 new games coming out on Steam every week. So it's difficult to say that there's a particular way that you should. It's often about finding your own niche, your own approach to the game that you're developing or the business that you're developing, and then finding the right match for the investor and publisher side. There's no like one correct way, for sure.
One of the recommendation I give studios, I had a conversation with a studio this week about this, is you first need to understand where you are, what you want, and what you want to achieve. You know, we talked about the fact that there is such a wide spectrum of people that want to throw money at developers today. You know, it's really like the best time in history to be a developer creating content, creating game, right? It's not the easiest, but it's actually the best point in time. But you really need to know where you are as a company and the kind of money you want, right? When you look at here, you go from a VC to a publisher / developer / investor. Who do you talk to, right? And who you talk to also depends on what you want to achieve long term, but also where you are on that journey, right? So I think that is where I would start from, me being a developer, is understand myself and understand the kind of money that I need, I want, and I can get. One of the beautiful things, I always talk about this, right? Especially in the independent movement, people are happy to share. They are happy to connect. They are happy to give advice. Recommendation number one is talk to people that have been on the journey, people that are gonna take that journey, people with a relevant experience. Say, look, this is my company. This is what I have in my hands today. This is where I want to be in 5 years. This is what kind of investment do I need to seek. And then the second point, I was actually used to do a presentation on this. Know the people you're talking to. The company you're going to talk to, go and do your research. So, which is general, you know, everybody should be doing that. It's kind of ABC. But also another recommendation: know the people you're going to be talking to. I used to do this presentation with my history and say, look, this is all my history that's available on, you know, social media today, on Twitter. When you go and you're serious about asking somebody for money, make sure you do all your homework. So two things: do your homework and know the companies you're talking to, other people, but also know yourself, where you are and what you need.
I love all of that. I think maybe from the other side, like as a VC investor, what are we looking for? And, you know, why is that the case? And Sherry said earlier on her panel that we're looking for companies that are really going to become the next big thing and have the chance to go mainstream and you know, cement a multi-billion-dollar valuation. We don't say that for any for a random reason. It's the way that portfolio construction works for a venture fund, especially an early stage one. Typically, there are a handful of companies that end up driving most of the returns for that fund, and unfortunately, that's kind of the way it is. And so, bringing it back to like, what then as a VC can you do? What are you looking for? We're not investing necessarily in ideas. We're not investing in even the product. We're investing in the team. And do we believe that this is a team that can really drive to a big outcome? And you as a team, I guess the question then is, why are you the team who's going to solve the specific problem that you're solving? Where is it kind of something that maybe feels like a niche and is reasonably underserved, but has potentially far, far bigger? And how can you capture that opportunity? You know, maybe it's games for streamers, maybe it's, you know, the next really accessible version of a strategy game on mobile. Maybe it's Animal Crossing on mobile. But those ideas that then cascade into a series of thoughts that usually believe that actually the opportunity is a lot bigger and that type of game isn't out there. And actually, the team that exists, it may not be perfect, but there's a few people here who, based on whatever they've done, or the way that they appreciate the problem and what that problem looks like, kind of uniquely positioned to be that one team that you back. And we all do our homework. So if we meet one pitch that's in a certain area, we'll go and try and find the 5 other companies that are building something similar, and then base our decision off the back of which is the best fit along the lines of founder market fit and other factors. But I think that's a huge thing, just making sure that you're building in the right place and you have the team that can really execute on that.
I think that maybe a useful thing to say at this point is that a lot of new studios, for example, won't have very strong track record or experience in such cases. It's getting easier and easier nowadays, or there's a bit of a movement these days to validate your game as early as possible. So whether that is through like a Facebook click-through test, whether that is trying using Kickstarter as a market validation exercise rather than a crowdfunding exercise. This is something that you can, if you have great metrics from any kind of market validation, that will help you find investment or a publisher more easily if you don't have the background.
And that makes a massive difference. I mean, jokingly, it's probably like if you can maximize the fear of missing out for an investor, that's probably what gets them the most excited, right? So if there's like incredible retention metrics, then you're naturally going to take a look at it and take a very close look.
I'm going to dive into something that Parin was talking about there, like you're looking for games that are going to be the next big hit, or teams that are making something that could potentially become a hit. This has always been a very kind of hits-driven market, and the hits are now much more longer service. You've got things like Fortnite and PUBG and GTA Online and all these things that like it's not just a case of here's a game that's going to come out, sell X million copies, and that's going to be a hit. Like, what from your perspective constitutes a hit? What sort of thing are you looking for in terms of success? Because we're talking about like providing this good, interesting metrics and so forth. Like, are you? The whole industry seems to have shifted towards this kind of long tail model, but there are still people making not making that sort of title. Like, what is it? What is it that defines success for you in terms of whether or not you think a team will achieve it?
Yeah, huge question. I think in the venture space it is generally more about, this might sound unpopular, it's more about a kind of long-term games as a service type model than maybe the premium game model. And there are exceptions to that, so sometimes we meet very experienced founders who know how to build in premium but don't necessarily have the kind of free-to-play capability. They want to start out with a premium concept and then eventually move free-to-play once they're kind of the brand established, the platform is there, etc., etc. I do think like what it boils down to, it depends on what stage of the curve you're investing at, but very, very early, it is really about those retention metrics. And if you have players in a player base that exists, they keep coming back, and that player base grows predictably over time, and you can see a path to a large user base that you can then monetize. I think that's definitely still a concept that will resonate with a lot of investors, even if the revenue isn't there. So I think it is driven more by the amount of engagement than anything else, in my opinion. I think there are loads of other factors as well that go along with that. But in venture, I guess you'll kind of work out on the back of an envelope. Do you think this can become a $100 million revenue business, which then implies something like $1 billion valuation or more? And so there are then, it depends on your rate of monetization, the number of monthly applicants, blah, blah, blah. But you can't get away from an experience that loads of people love and people keep on coming back to.
Nice.
And I touched on it earlier on, right? Know the people you're going to talk to, also know yourself. So if you go to a VC and you present a title that's a premium title, like a couple of millions, you expect a return or even of 100%, the interest is probably not there. Might be wrong, but or you go to a private equity or angel investor, so you go to a publisher, you go to a platform, all those people you're going to be talking to, they have very, very different metrics for what is success for them. You know, if you talk to a platform and your title doesn't sell as much as you would have hoped, but it's a massive critical success, that's from a platform point of view is probably like a great return. If you go to a publisher and say, well, it's going to be a critical success, we're not going to make the money back, the publisher might be a bit nervous. So I think know your product and your company, your product, and know the people you're going to go to pitch to. Here on the two sides, you're probably better off if you want to have a premium title, a relatively small title to talk on the Thunderful side. If you have a free-to-play title that's, you know, high potential for, it might be better on the other side. We all want to find the next big thing, but we might be happy to touch things that don't necessarily have the promise to be the next big thing, just to be a successful product to a certain level. So again, know what is driving your partners.
The other thing I would add, though, by the way, is so as LEGO Ventures, we're very thesis-driven. So if we see a concept that feels, you know, like the next kind of creative social game that deserves to exist, you know, tells really meaningful stories that really matter to a lot of people, as part of our portfolio, we'll still look very close at the opportunity and work out. You know, one of the big thesis points that we have is we think that this idea of storytelling through gaming should be much, much bigger than it is now. And there's not been many big successes in that space. Kind of from a financial perspective, but with, you know, people like Netflix getting involved in gaming, arguably that space should be huge. So we do take bets in ways where maybe it doesn't feel like the traditional thing that has succeeded in the past. But yeah, to your point earlier, I think it's definitely finding out. And you could go with a publisher first. You could, you know, retain your IP, go through that route, and then think, hey, we want to double down, do something even bigger because of the success we have, and that's wonderful as well.
I have to say, I agree that sometimes some publishers decide to pivot, and then they look into or they look into diversifying their portfolio, etc. And you wouldn't necessarily know from the research that you do with them. You'd have to learn it from having a meeting, a conversation. And there's like 200 or so publishers out there, so you know it can be quite tricky to work out which ones are the right fit for you. But there are all sorts of publishers, all sorts of sizes. So yes, there's more and more interest, investors particularly in the games as service space, but there's a lot of thriving indie game publishers investing in like really small games, premium titles. I think in the last year has shown that you can have games made by tiny teams, 3 people, 5 people, and become massive breakout hits, like Among Us, like Valheim, for example. And the hits can come from anywhere.
Yeah. I'm going to back that up because I feel like I'm covering a new publisher every week. I'm going to ask one more question of the panel, and then I'm going to turn to the audience if you've got questions, so have a think about them now. Last question from me is like any kind of particular trends or growth areas. Now, I did in our preparation warn that there would be forfeits for anyone who said the M word, and Parin got very close to that, but I will allow it if it is genuinely like something that's an area of interest. What are the big growth areas that people can see on the horizon?
I mean, there's so much money coming into this space. So it means that like almost all areas are growing. And so there's like pretty much every single vertical you can imagine, except for maybe like arcade games, which is kind of growing. But certainly there's a lot of hype about the M word. And also things like NFTs, for example. You have like various investors that are just going, yes, anything NFT. But yeah, there's usually there's all sorts of different trends happening.
Always be wary of trends. You know, we get excited about the M word or the NFT. We got excited about virtual reality. We got excited about augmented reality. PC gaming was dead. The console were dead. Like more like
single player games are dead.
Single player games were dead. Like always be wary of the trends. The problem is we all fear of missing out. There's this new trend, but always be wary of it. And also another thing, like with trends, is kind of you have those tsunamis, those waves that are happening. Also be wary of jumping on the trends too late. You know, both my experience at platforms and publishing is that once you have the Valheim, wave, everybody's jumping on that, but then you have a 2 years delay on your product, right? You know, a lot of people jumped on VR early. It's actually now getting a lot of very good traction, but it's a few years too late. So there are companies, they are built and designed to ride that wave. We all came across companies like that in our careers, that they are designed to ride that wave. They're going to go and talk to the right investors. They like to be on the wave just in case. But always treat new trends as potential fads. And always think carefully about you bet your company, your money, your house, mortgage on a new trend. Because there are people that are more than happy, investors with deep pockets, they're more than happy to invest 2-3% of their investment portfolio into a new trend. And then from a development or publishing point of view, a smaller company think, look how so much money is going to this new trend. But when you put in the perspective of how much money those companies are investing anyway, it's a fraction. It's like you're betting, $10 on a horse, or 10 pounds on a horse, right? And for those companies, they're investing few billions, but for them it's relatively small amount of money. So always be wary of trends.
You've been warned.
Yeah.
I won't talk about NFTs, but I think for us, like kind of what's old is new in a way. You might expect to say that as coming from kind of representing the Lego brand and Lego Ventures. But really, we think there's something enduring about this idea of like fun, active, creative play. And the success of something like Roblox, I think, is a testament to the value of the community that builds games in a certain way. Some of them look very scrappy. Some of them are actually incredibly intricate and really well designed. To encourage people who haven't been on the platform that much to go and play some of the games out there. But I think both takes on UGC involving a platform approach or a game-driven approach. Anything from something like a level editor all the way through something more powerful and fully fledged. Even challenger platforms to Roblox, or some way of making something like TikTok for games. There's a lot of concepts in that space, and I think there's a reason why, because we've seen a platform like Roblox really take off in a big way, and also creativity is something that is universal. Everyone can create. I think everyone can eventually go on a journey where they create something really simple, but actually end up creating something really complex, beautiful, something that means something to them. And there's real value in that whole journey. So I think we pay a lot of attention to that space in particular, and when you layer over kind of the social dynamic of that and getting kind of communities together and really building for each other and sharing those experiences with your family, extended family, with friends, etc. I think there's definitely going to be more successes in that space, and maybe it's a change in consumer behavior from more of the hardcore, fast twitch type games, and also developers who maybe grown up actually building a lot of those games and who now have children and are like, actually I want a game that I can play with my kids, and that's why making this other type of gaming platform.
Okay, right, this is the fun bit where I get Jamie to run up and down the room as fast as possible. So if you can coordinate your questions so you're like opposite ends each time, that'd be marvellous. Are there any questions from the room that is not about the M word?
I'm not sure if this is covered, but what I'd like to know is if someone's approaching you for the next big hit, and the game, depending on so much of the big hit comes from actually capitalizing on a platform like Steam or something like that. It actually knows a lot of marketing. How much of that money that you earmark for this game or this platform or games as a service does the one who's pitching have to think about first? For example, it's 40% marketing, but it's not just marketing, it's also getting traction on that platform. I don't use that word, but literally, the word democracy literally means, at that point, paying them a lot of money to show it on top of like a featured thing. So how much of that money actually goes into making that a hit? And the developer has to consider that, and the publisher has to consider that, the venture capitalist has to consider that. without that, how do you actually decide what's a hit? I'm sorry if there's multiple questions.
I can jump in. Yeah, there are a lot of questions in that single one. I think the first bit of it is like how much a developer should think about the money that is needed. I was reading, there was a thread on Twitter recently that was touching on this. Is ultimately, developer, unless you're very experienced, if you're not pretty new developer, you might not have the data, the expertise to think about the marketing and cost of acquisition if you're looking at a free-to-play. So I think if you're going to talk to a publisher, probably don't worry too much about it. Just be aware of the product you have in your hands and the kind of market you're addressing. That's more important. Probably if you're going to a VC, my assumption that you probably would expect you to have a bit more of an answer for that, or at least acknowledging the fact, I don't know, I mean, it's for you really.
We've done a bit of a swap of mics. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating question. So one way to answer it would be, we're always looking for studios that have some sort of demonstrable advantage when it comes to distribution. So, for example, it's a deliberate choice that you build your game on Roblox because there are 200 million monthly actives, and cost of acquisition is basically negligible if you build a great game. Similarly, I don't know, like some form of strategy around a type of game which is naturally viral and viral social, or a game which may rely on kind of asynchronous or asymmetric dynamics where there are influences involved. It's a natural part of the way the game works. I think it depends on that kind of funding journey as well. Hopefully early on a lot of money is going towards kind of building that product, building that MVP, and then much more of the scaling journey is very clear, maybe Series B plus or even later. And then it's pretty credible to be putting marketing dollars into a machine that's running really, really fast and taking the benefit in terms of like the revenue growth and the revenue multiple you achieve. So I think relying on paid is really hard, and I think that's not just in gaming, that's like across the board. And maybe on the publisher side, it might be you've got a special relationship with getting certain slots in certain places, and that's really valuable to studios.
Yeah, I think that for smaller studios that maybe are doing a premium title, I think I mentioned earlier, like market validation early on can work. So like just working out if you like the premise of your game is attractive to players, you can test out super early, and then you can work out from that what kind of what marketing works, where does your audience live, and from that work out a budget if you're self-publishing, and if with the publisher, then it's usually the publisher's telling you not marketing budget.
And also, like, final comment from me on that one. Quite often, from the outside, we all look at those incredible breakthrough moments and those titles, and we think, look, think about all the planning, all the investment that was, put in the budget. The reality, when you start going on the inside, there was very little of that. If you pick a bunch of titles from Angry Birds on mobile, or Minecraft, or DayZ, or Among Us, or Fortnite, a lot of those are it's really something that happened and nobody actually exactly knows how. So quite often it's more like a unique situation. The stars were aligned, there was something special there, a moment in time. We have seen it during the pandemic, a bunch of titles that suddenly became huge online, and then you scratch your head and you don't understand, and you think it's actually the pandemic has played maybe 50% part in their success. So quite often those transformational moments, they are not planned by anyone. If you're working on the next AAA product, it's easy to say, well, this is my marketing budget, it's going to be a percentage of my forecasted revenues, I can grow the budget over time if I get traction. But transformational moment, they often are just something that happens and nobody knows how.
Who's going to be next to make Jamie run across the room?
It is as well. What's the M word?
Metaverse.
I thought it was mobile.
No, mobile's an acceptable M word.
My question was around, there's a bit of hypothetics here as well, right? Are you taking into consideration where a studio is based? an economic perspective as well. Naturally, Eastern Europe and Asia Central, the capital spent there can go further compared to Western countries such as well. Maybe it's not studios, but what about like studio ID? A studio in Vietnam versus a studio in the UK. But what about UK studios who have teams in other places, etc. Is that a factor into any of your decision making? When you're looking at your portfolio and you're thinking, we want to allocate that capital to as many companies as possible, as many bets as possible.
I mean, can be a factor for some investors and some publishers, yeah. So a lot of publishers, for example, are just trying to make lots of small bets in many indie projects, and the projects that are made in places where, for example, the costs are very low, are great. Projects are made in countries where there's a lot of government support. Then development funding that you need to invest is relatively low, which is great. So it can de-risk it for some publishers. Some publishers are great. Other publishers, they're much more like a few eggs. They just only publish a few a year, and they just are looking for the best possible games, the games that they're really in love with. So it varies, I'd say. You have some. I think that for game developers now based in global regions, there's so much information that is available online. For example, you're not so much as a disadvantage. You have much more access than you did previously. So I think it's a great time to be a developer in this country as well.
Yeah, we don't think too much about it, to be honest. I guess, the kind of higher quality version of that question is probably, teams that have been able to go fully remote and then hire the people that they could never have hired, incredible people who work, are commutable distance, and they've gone and done that. I think that's really, really cool. Definitely a decision that probably needs to be made at some point in the company's journey for sure, to make sure that the capital runs the right way. But I think it's more about the talent that you can secure rather than necessarily just lowering the costs.
And a final thing for me, I think it's linked to the project. If we find a great title in San Francisco, probably one of the most expensive places where to do business, would we say no because of the per month cost? No. If you're working on a smaller games, then where your forecasts are not that high, it's easier maybe to sign it if your costs are not San Francisco costs. So, but it's limited to that. It's not that companies would stop working with studios because they are too expensive, or would not work with studios because it's too cheap, and you don't. It's the game that matters.
Right, I think we've got time for one more question, which is from online actually. It's always great when a launch goes well, but often launches don't go perfectly. So how can you tell if a publisher is good at being reactive?
I mean, I always think it's important to do due diligence on a publisher and investor before you sign on with them, and that means going to talk to the developers that they've worked with previously. That is the most direct way. Firstly, you can ask the publisher, when it comes to the right stage in the negotiation process, you can ask the publisher to introduce them to the previous developers and have just calls and ask them how it went. And then it's also really important to talk to the developers that the publishers don't want you to talk to, even more important, and find out how it is to work with the publisher, especially when things go wrong, because I think some things always goes wrong in production, in release, and so forth. So, it's a part of your due diligence. It's very important.
I guess I'm a publisher.
The
due diligence is important. Speak to people that work with us. So, you always have partnership that sometimes don't work out. So you always have that. Some developer might not like it, might not have enjoyed working with us. Some loved it. So that's always important. You never know how a launch is going to go. That's one of the most critical moments for developer-publisher relations. developer relations, because sometimes it's hard to tell why things didn't go right. I think you need to get to the point where you have enough confidence and trust in the partner that you kind of are in lockstep at that point. The publisher has no interest in it. Most publishers, not all of them maybe, but have no interest in abandoning your game. So that it's an important thing. One thing that you can do as a developer, make sure that in the contract you have certain guarantees from the publishers. Contracts are very negotiable these days. That pendulum over the years swung more in the direction of developers, especially if you have a game that's very desirable. So again, you can be proactive and start thinking about what if things go wrong. So I would think about that. And in general, there are some metrics and KPI that will tell you whether things are going to be okay or whether your publisher has done the work as best as they can before you get to day one. If you're looking at Steam wishlisting, or whether you're seeing the PR that you're getting for the title. So there are also telltale signs. So it's not just about, oh, we failed the launch and now what we're going to do. You want to pay attention throughout that journey. Realizing that your partner is not the best partner where you launch and things are going wrong, maybe it's too late at that point.
Okay, thank you so much for everyone in the room for listening. Thank you so much to everyone watching online. And biggest of all, thank you so much to my panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick mention about stuff that's coming up. 3 o'clock, there's a round table with Julia Kenny from Sega. You might have seen talk earlier. That's in room 5 downstairs. And then at 3:30, back here, we have a pre-recorded interview between Chris String from GamesIndustry.biz and Fergus Urquhart, CEO of Obsidian, about working with publishers. So answering some of the questions that we had on the panel here as well. And then at 4 o'clock, we have a live link with Valve for an exclusive Q&A about Steam and the new Steam Deck. So hopefully you'll join us for that as well. Thanks very much, and see you soon.